Welcome to my garden. Your host, Gretchen Schmitt. Welcome to the GinGee GoodEarth programs, and I'd like to start this program with the best-loved poem of the American people on faith and reverence in the remembrance of what is going on in current events with the United States of America today, where we do have domestic enemies of our republic. And again, every congressman, House of Representative, senator, departments that are sworn in by the Pledge of Allegiance and their promise to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States of America from all enemies, both domestic and foreign. And right now we see a vast number of constitutional violations. And again, I'd like to encourage you to vote. And we have a organization called Judicial Watch, and I have every copy of, it's called Government Waste Watch. And there we have the high price of peanuts, new HUD scandal, news for CAGW donors, too much for health care, pension quicksand. And this is a magazine that I would get in the 90s. I have all the editions. And then again, I have been working with hunger projects and food distribution since 1985. So I'd like to share that with you. And let's, without further ado, read the poem on faith and reverence. It's called My Church by, only the initials are present, EOG. So we don't know the name, but we have everything else. My church has but one temple, wide as the world is wide, set with 1,000,000 stars, where 1,000,000 hearts abide. My church has no creed to bar a single brother man, but says, come thou and worship to every one who can. My church has no roof, nor walls, nor floors, save the beautiful sod, for fear I would seem to limit the love of the illimitable God. Now it's signed by EOG, and from historic reference, if there's a middle initial, then usually it was written by a woman. But if there are only two initials, it's written by a man, or the vice versa. I can't remember everything, but I think that's the key. For even paintings, if they're only signed by a woman, they have to have 3 initials, and if it's signed by a man, they only use 2. So there's some kind of reference to that. Enjoy my picture show of pictures of Pennsylvania and New York. At the end of the program, I will be reading Ike's Farewell to Churchill, January 30th, 1965. We'll save that for the end of the program. And I wanted to let you know, I'm back on board. I took a 5-day break, and I will be finishing up the book on Norway and the Vikings, Scandinavian countries, and I'm also going to read Myths of the Red Children. And again, I have a Iroquois Nation heritage, French Iroquois, And my ancestry goes back to the farmlands on Central Park, New York City. So I'm dated that far back. And again, European descent too. I'm also going to read the book on Daniel Boone, Wilderness Scout. So that's in the future. And I will be reading the book I co-authored, White Buffalo Spirit. And I'll be showing, I have a huge doll collection, but this was one of my first dolls when I was growing up. And she's very old and quite loved. And I also have other dolls. I have to go get one. I was the youngest girl of 6 children, and this doll was my very first doll also. And she accompanied me to the hospital when I had to have surgery in 2nd grade, and I held on her for happiness and wellness, and very beloved doll. And I'll share more dolls. And then this is another doll that's gorgeous, and kind of like with the beautiful satin skirt and the basket of fruit. And she's also a very beloved doll. All the dolls I had in my lifetime as a youngster were very cherished. And, you know, dolls help you dream. They help you play out your life and learning about other cultures and history. So, without further ado, I'm going to also read about the honeybee. And I wanted to tell you that the month of June, the management of the honeybee. Continue to check for the queen cells. Rear queens if you prefer your own stock. Check colonies for disease and monitor for mites. Remove comb honey suppers when properly sealed. I meant to say supers. Remove comb honey supers when properly sealed, and that means basically when the worker bees cap the honey, and it's completely capped, all those tiny hexagon cells of capped honey by wax. Weigh the honeycombs. Uncap the combs, and there's a certain device to do that, a scraper. Provide plenty of super space. Use 9 supers instead of 10 supers to keep the man-made hive cooler. Control the swarming. Capture the swarms. Provide plenty of pollen sources. So those are some tips for colony management of the honeybee. And it looks like today we need management of our cities, neighborhoods, to help maintain a healthy environment. And I would like to read, honey, just 1 spoonful can help quiet a nighttime cough. Honey soothes an irritated throat to help calm repeated coughing. It's easily added to hot flavored teas, and again, you never serve honey to children 1 year age or younger. So we want to be dam conscious. On downriver approach, a dam is difficult to see. You may not see it until it's too close to avoid going over it. This is a reminder to beekeepers to keep abreast on the health safety management issues of their honeybees. Remember to manage and handle your honeybees properly. Safeguard bees' health. So, gives you kind of a nautical seafarer idea. So, what I'm looking for right now, I want to read, "It's time to make decisions for helping to save the honeybee from extinction. There lies a cherry tree fork among the Pennsylvania forest woodlands, a path not traveled frequently. A rare black cherry tree stands upright, reaching for the sky, and is not yielding. Just as this cherry tree fork provides a view of strength and power, we need to dedicate, strongly advocate, and provide healthy and sustainable environments in which honeybees can thrive. Plant a fruit tree, herbal garden, vegetable garden, and other flower garden beds. Be ecologically sensible about helping to save the honeybee. Just think, the honeybee is the only insect that produces food eaten by man. Help save the honeybee." We need more honeybee enthusiasts to start up the agricultural beekeepers' honey-based business. And again, beekeeping is $1 million business. Honeybees are to the natural ecosystem of this world what farmers are to our viable, sound food system. And it's a very lucrative career to be a beekeeper. There is an investment, and we can talk about that later. And again, all my programs are artistic, fun-filled, and educational. And I hope you enjoy the reading today. And I have made a commitment to read wonderful books, wonderful old books. And we're going to finish the book on the United States of America Universal History, written in 1830. And I'm backtracking a little bit, but I'm on page 39. And there are 668 pages. I just noticed a lock of hair in the book, and people would do that. Look at this old label I just found in the book. The book was written in 1830. That's a part of the book. And the book is leather bound. And was owned by a veteran, Army veteran. And we will go ahead and get started. And I will read until the video recorder shuts down. And once it shuts down, I will resume a next chapter of the program. And I'm hoping I can get Ike's Farewell to Churchill read before it does shut down. So we're just doing pages at a time because I want it to be, entertaining. So we're going to move into the picture show a little more. Okay. Let's begin. This was the first house erected in Connecticut. It was covered with the utmost dispatch and well fortified. The Sackhams, who were originally owners of the soil, had been driven from this point of the country by the Pequots, and were now carried home on board Holmes' vessel, or ship. The Dutch, about the same time, erected a trading house at Hartford. It was with great difficulty that Holmes and his company erected and fortified their house, and kept it afterwards. The Dutch, before the Plymouth people took possession of the river, had been invited to trade with them at Connecticut, but when they found that they were preparing for a settlement there, they repented of the invitation and did all in their power to prevent them. On the 8th of June, the Dutch purchased about 20 acres of land at Hartford of a Pequot captain. Of this Dutch took possession. They protested against Holmes, the builder of the trading house. Sometimes afterwards, the Dutch governor dispatched a reinforcement from Fort Amsterdam to the Connecticut, designing to drive Holmes and his company from the river. A band of 70 men assaulted the Plymouth house, but they found it too well fortified and gave up their design. In November and December, the smallpox raged among the Indians. 2 Sachems with a great part of their Indians died. When their own people forsook them, the English who lived near them went to their wigwams and ministered medicines to them. Some families spent almost their whole time with them. One Englishman buried 30 of their dead in one day. In 1634, at a meeting of the General Court in September, the people of Newton made application for liberty to remove to Connecticut River. Mr. Hooker acted as principal advocate for the people. The court refused to give their consent, and the design was given over in 1635. Permission was granted on condition that the new settlement should continue subject to the jurisdiction of Massachusetts. The people of Newtown, Dorchester, and Watertown now began to prepare for their new habitation. In the course of the season, several people went to Connecticut River, some by water, some through the wilderness. The Dorchester men sat down at Windsor, near the Plymouth trading house. They purchased the building and land owned by the Plymouth people. The people from Newton, of whom but few removed till the following year, settled at Hartford. The Watertown settlers began the town of Westerfeld. In 1636, about 100 persons, men, women, and children, led by Reverend Messrs. Hooker and Stone, together with their horses, cattle, and swine, commenced their journey through the wilderness to Connecticut River. They traveled about 2 weeks on foot, during which time they lived upon the milk of their cows. By the 25th of November, Connecticut River was frozen over. Heavy falls of snow succeeded, and the season was very severe. Several small vessels, which had been laden with their furniture and provisions, sailed from Boston and were wrecked on the coast. By the last of November, provisions began to fail in the settlements on the river, and death looked them sternly in the face. 13 in one company, driven by hunger, attempted their way in this severe season. In passing the river, one of their company fell through the ice and was drowned. The other 12 were kept from perishing by the Indians and arrived in Massachusetts in 10 days. Their distress was so great that by the 1st of December a considerable part of the men settlers were obliged to abandon their habitations. As the only means of preserving their lives, about 70 persons, men, women, and children, left their settlements and went down the river in hopes of meeting with their provisions. As their expectation failed, they went on board the Rebecca, lying near the mouth of the river. This, but 2 days before, was frozen in 20 miles up the river, but was released by the falling of a small rain and reached Boston in 5 days. Had it not been for very quick passage, the people must have perished. The people that kept their situations on the river suffered extremely. After all the help they were able to obtain by hunting, and from the Indians, they were obliged to subsist on acorns, malt, and grain. The number upon what they found in the woods and meadows wintered better than those which were brought over. However, a great number of them perished. Early in the spring, those who went from Connecticut to spend the winter with their friends began to return to their new habitations. The first court held in Connecticut was held at Newton, April 26, 1636, towards the last of the year 1635. Mr. Winthrop, son of the Massachusetts governor, the worthy character who afterwards procured the Connecticut charter, arrived at Boston with a commission from Lord Say and Seal, Lord Brooke, and others, to take possession of Connecticut River and build a fort which they had manned and named Saybrook. In a few days a Dutch vessel appeared off the harbor, sent to take possession of the entrance of the river and erect fortifications, but the English had by this time mounted 2 cannon and prevented their landing. Thus providentially was this fine tract of country preserved for our venerable ancestors and their posterity. In September 1636, Mr. Pittsuburgh, with a part of the people of Roxbury, began the settlement of the town of Springfield. But no sooner had the English begun to trade and make settlements in Connecticut than the Pequods began to murder and kill their cattle. In 1634 they murdered Captain Stone and Norton with their whole crew, consisting of 8 men. They then plundered and sunk the vessel. In November following, the Pequods sent a messenger to Boston for the purpose of obtaining peace with the English. He made an offer of great quantity of beaver skins to persuade the governor to enter into a league with them. The governor assured them that the English were willing to make peace on a condition that they would give up the murderers of Captain Stone and his men. The Indians assured him that the murderers were all dead but 2, and they would give them up to justice. They offered to give up the right at the Connecticut River if the English desired to settle there, and engaged to assist them as far as was in their power in making settlements. They also agreed that they would give the English 40 beaver and 30 otter skins. And again, the otter was a great animal that lived in all the river tributaries of northeastern United States of America. So the otter is coming back, and I saw an otter on the river rock at Roaring Run in Apollo, Pennsylvania, where the Erie Canal boats used to travel. And so the otter is coming back, and the beaver. The beaver has been very busy chomping down the trees and making homes and habitats. The governor and council entered into treaty with them on all the conditions they proposed. whatever their designs were at the time. They soon afterwards became more and more mischievous, hostile, and bloody. In 1636, John Oldham was murdered near Block Island. He had with him 2 boys and 2 Narragansett Indians. These were taken and carried off. John Gallup, as he was going from Connecticut to Boston, discovered Mr. Oldham's vessel full of Indians and saw a canoe go from her laden with goods. Suspecting they had murdered Mr. Oldham, he held them, but received no answer. Gallup was a bold man, and although he had but 1 man and 2 boys with him, he immediately bore down upon her and fired duck-shot so thick among them that he soon cleared the deck. The Indians all got under the hatches. He then stood off, bore down upon her with a brisk gale, and nearly overset her, was so frightened the Indians that several jumped overboard and were drowned. He then stood off, and running down upon her the 2nd time, raked her fore and aft with his shot, and running down upon her a 3rd time, he gave her such a shock that 5 more jumped overboard and were drowned. He then boarded her and took 2 of the Indians and bound them. 2 or 3 others, armed with swords, in the little room below, could not be driven out. Mr. Oldham's corpse was found on board, his head split, and the body mangled in a barbarous manner. Gallup and his men then, as decently as possible, put the corpse into the sea. After taking her rigging and goods, which had not been carried off, they were obliged to let her go adrift, and she was lost. The Indians who committed the murder were chiefly Block Islanders and Narragansetts. The governor and council of Massachusetts dispatched Captain Endicott with 90 volunteers to avenge the murder. The Narragansett Sachems sent home Mr. Oldham's 2 boys and made peace with them, but the other Indians made no compensation. Captain Endicott was ordered to proceed to Block Island, put the men to the sword, and take possession of the island, but to spare the women and children. They sailed from Boston 25th of August. When they arrived at Block Island, 40 or 50 Indians appeared on shore and opposed his landing. After a short skirmish, the Indians fled to the woods. After the English had spent 2 days on the islands, burning the wigwams, destroying the corn, and starving their canoes, they sailed for the Pequot country. When they had arrived in Pequot harbor, Captain Endicott acquainted the Pequots with his design. In a few hours, about 300 Pequots appeared upon the shore. But as soon as they were fully informed of his business, they began to withdraw into the woods. He landed his men on both sides of the harbor, burnt their wigwams, destroyed their canoes, killed 1 or 2 Indians, and returned to Boston. This measure, instead of allaying, seemed to increase their hostility. Several persons were taken near Saybrook fort and tortured with savage barbarity. About the beginning of October, the enemy concealed themselves in the grass in the meadow and surprised 5 of the garrison at Saybrook. As they were carrying home their hay, 1 Butterfield was taken and tortured to death. The rest made their escape. 8 or 10 days after, Joseph Philly, a master of a small vessel, was taken as he was going down the Connecticut River. He came to anchor about 3 miles above the fort, and taking a canoe and 1 man with him, went a-fowling. No sooner had he discharged his piece than a large number of Pequots, arriving from their concealment, took him and killed him and his companions. The Indians used him in the most barbarous manner, first cutting off his hands and then his feet, thus torturing him to death. As he did not groan, they pronounced him a stout man. In March 1627, Lieutenant Gardiner, who commanded the fort at Saybrook, going out without about 12 men to burn their marshes, was waylaid near a narrow neck of the land. The enemy rose upon him, killed 3 of his men, and wounded several. The enemy pursued them in great numbers to the fort, and compassed it on all sides. They challenged the English to come out and fight. They boasted that they could kill the English men all one. Flies mocked the groans of the wounded. But the cannon, being louder with the grape shot, was fired among them, which caused them to groan in reality. Soon after, the enemy, in the number of canoes, beset a shallop going down the river, with 3 men on board. The men fought bravely, but were overpowered by numbers and taken. The Indians ripped them up from the bottom of their bellies to their throats, and cleft them down their backs. They hung them upon the trees beside the river, in full view of the English, as they passed up and down on the river. At a court holden at Hartford, it was decreed that the plantation of Newton should be named Hartford, and that Watertown should be named Wethersfield, and that Dorchester should be called Windsor. In April, the Indians waylaid the people of Wethersfield as they were going into fields to labor, and killed 6 men and 3 women. 2 maids were taken captive, 20 cows killed, and other damages done to the inhabitants. The court holden at Hartford, May 1st, 1637, resolved to prosecute the war with the Pequots, that 90 men should be raised, 42 from Hartford, 30 from Windsor, and 18 from Wethersfield. Massachusetts determined to send 200 and Plymouth 40 men to assist Connecticut in prosecuting the war. On Wednesday, the 10th of May, the troops fell down the river for the fort at Saybrook. They consisted of 90 Englishmen and about 70 Mohican and River Indians. They embarked on board a pink pinnace and a shallop. And I have to look up that word, pinnace, and I can't imagine what that would look like. So I will look it up. They embarked on board a pink, a pinnace, and a shallop. The Indians were commanded by Uncas, Sachem of the Mohicans. The whole was commanded by Captain John Mason, who had been bred a soldier in the old countries. The Reverend Mr. Stone of Hartford went their chaplain. On Monday, the 15th, the troops arrived at Saybrook Fort. As the water was low, this little fleet several times ran aground. The Indians, impatient of delays, desired to be set on shore, promising to join the English at Saybrook. The captain therefore granted their request. On their march they fell in with about 40 of the enemy. Near the fort, killed 7 and took 1 prisoner. The prisoner had been a perfidious villain. He had lived in the fort some time before and could speak English well. But after the Pequots commenced hostilities against the English, he became a constant spy upon the garrison, and acquainted Sassacus with everything he could discover. He had been present at the slaughter of all the English who had been killed at Saybrook. Uncas and his men insisted upon executing him according to the manner of their ancestors, and the English, in the circumstances in which they then were, did not judge it prudent to interpose. The Indians, kindling a large fire, violently tore him limb from limb, barbarously cutting his flesh in pieces. They handed it round from one to another, eating it, singing, and dancing round the fire in their violent and tumultuous manner. The bones and the such parts of their captive as were not consumed in this dreadful repast were committed to the flames and burnt to ashes. This success was matter of joy, not only as it was check upon the enemy, but it was an evidence of the fidelity of Uncas and his Indians, of which the English had been before in doubt. There were other circumstances, however, which more than counterbalanced this joy. The army lay wind-bound until Friday, and Captain Mason and his officers were entirely divided in opinion with respect to the manner of prosecuting their enterprise. Enterprise is also another name for kirk and church. The court, by the commission and instructions which it had given, enjoined the landing of the men at Pequot harbor, and from thence they should advance upon the enemy. The captain was for passing by them, and sailing to Narragansett country. He was fixed in this opinion, because that expected the army of the Pequot harbor. They kept watch upon the river night and day. Their number of men greatly exceeded his. He was informed at Saybrook that they had 16 firearms with powder and shot. The harbor was compassed with rocks and thickets, affording the enemy every advantage. They were upon the land and exceedingly light-footed. He was therefore of the opinion that they would render it very difficult and dangerous to land, and that he might sustain such losses as would discourage his men, and frustrate the design of the expedition. If they should make good their landing, he was sure that they directed their march through the country to the enemy's forts. They would waylay and attack them with their whole force at every difficult pass. Besides, if they should find on trial that they were not able to defeat the English, they would run off to swamps and fastnesses where they could not be found, and they